Ron Scott with freedomreport.ca. I'm here with teaching elder Andrew DeBartolo. Is that right?
DeBartolo.
DeBartolo.
It's okay.
Of Encounter Church in Kingston, Ontario. Thanks for welcoming me back to the church for this interview.
Absolutely.
So I guess tell us a little bit about yourself and the Encounter Church. How did you get started, and kind of how long have you been ministering the Word of God?
Yeah, so I guess this would be the first time we talked about this. My wife and I moved to Kingston in 2011. I took a position on staff at another church here in town. After a couple years, because of some financial issues, they couldn't sustain a second staff person. Mm-hmm. They decided, we had to let you go. You were kind of the newest hire. And so at that point, my wife and I started trying to discern, what do we do? Do we go back home to Toronto? Do we look for another church here in town? Nothing seemed to be a really good fit. We'd come to love this city and have a real burden for this city. And so we decided maybe we should start a new work. So we connected with a network that's based primarily in the States. We partnered with them, and then we started in July of 2015. It would have been 4 people in my apartment building. And then we would grow a bit and grow a bit. We moved to a basement. We grew a bit more. And then finally in January 2016, after having taken over the lease and done the renovations, we started meeting here in our space publicly. So it's been just over 5 years that we've been meeting here in this space. And then, there's been growth as well. It's kind of ups and downs, the life of a church. People come, people go. Kingston's a real transient city. Mm-hmm. Students come, students go. We've had a number of military people who've come and gone. And so that's kind of the brief history of our church. We decided we needed to stay in this city, mm-hmm. and we decided a new work was what was for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting how you kind of start, like you said, there's 4 people and grown into, in just 5 years, the size that your church is now. So that's good. It just shows you how things can start small and
very small,
work their way up to something that you probably didn't imagine it to be that quick, I would imagine.
Not within the last little bit, no.
Yeah.
It's not that sudden surge that's come in the last few months.
Yeah. But it's good, though. Yeah. It means people are looking for something that they need in life.
Mm-hmm.
So now, you decided before Easter weekend to join the Liberty Coalition of Canada's group of churches that would run Easter services without restrictions. And in fact, that's actually how we met. I was here for your Good Friday service, and I very much enjoyed myself. We've been able to celebrate Easter as a group of free individuals, and the part that really touched me the most of the service was really being able to see others around me smiling and laughing and singing, which has been forbidden by the government, and just being able to rejoice in the service and with each other. This is something that I think is really, I really feel that this is what we've been missing for far too long in society. So I guess tell us what this last year has been like for you, your family, your congregation, and what led up to you making the decision to stay open for services?
Our response initially, I think, was like most, if not every church, which was, you saw the initial numbers and the modeling that came out of Imperial College in London. And the initial numbers were stark. Like in Canada, for example, they were anticipating about 1% of our population dying, which is about 330,000 people. So that's a lot. And so initially what we did is what everyone did is we said, okay, let's just take a week or two. Some of our people on their own said, maybe we'll just stay home for a week or two just to see, 14 days to flatten the curve. Let's kind of see how this goes. Mm-hmm. And we thought that was fine. Now, I'll say at this part of the answer that our decision early on was we are going to suspend meeting for a few weeks, not because the government has told us to, mm-hmm. but because that kind of decision is made within the authority of the elders of the church, that the church makes that decision. And so we made that decision because we didn't know what was going on, and so we wanted to be safe. So there was 1 week, and only 1 week, probably around St. Patrick's Day, which is when the first kind of 14-day to flatten the curve thing happened, where I told everyone stay home, and I'll just do a live stream or we'll do a Skype call sermon. The next week, there were two people who said, we're not staying home. One was an older lady that doesn't have internet, and the other one was a guy who said, listen, I'm working construction, I'm out in the world, right? So I want to be there. And so they were there. And after that, we had decided quickly, based on new information that was coming out, based on some of the different modeling. I mean, you had studies coming out of Oxford and Stanford saying, listen, it's not going to be that. The mortality rate's not going to be 1%. It's going to be more like 3%, 0.24%, much lower based on the same numbers.
Yeah.
And we just started seeing some of the differences in the language. It's no longer about 14 days to slow the spread. Now it's about preventing as many cases or deaths as possible. And now we need to wait for the vaccine. So all this mixed messaging, all these confusing things coming out of the government and the media, we became a little skeptical. And just seeing what was going on, seeing the effects or the projected effects of lockdowns and what it was going to do in terms of worldwide hunger, in terms of how it would affect people's mental health, which we've seen that play out. And so other than the first couple weeks where we said, okay, we'll stay home, we'll play it safe, we quickly decided, no, everyone come back when you want. Come back and meet when you want. We had decided that we were not going to enforce any of the sit apart, wear your masks, no singing. That was definitely not going to happen. And so really quickly, and so for us, this is probably April, May. So April, May, we decided we're going to do our thing, and if you want to come, you can come. And so there was a slow trickle. Eventually, I think, as our church started also realizing and seeing new stuff coming out, the changing of the goalposts, they realized we can come to church again. And so it's been, over a year that we have been meeting the way we have, with more or less people depending, singing, celebrating the Lord's Supper. I mean, by God's grace, we haven't had a single positive test. So obviously no single death either. And so we've been grateful for that. But we decided early on, this was our decision to make. This was not the decision of any bureaucrat or health official to make, that the Lord has given that authority to the elders of the local church. And we've been blessed because of it. We've been thankful for it, for all the things you said, being able to see each other and sing. It's been amazing. In terms of my personal family, we homeschool. And so there was really no change to our lifestyle. Our kids are at home. We go play in the backyard. We're going for walks anyways. And so it's not like there's a huge change to our life. It's just kind of navigating it together as a church and growing more and more and more in unity, that this is what we need to be doing. Yeah.
Well, and like you said, it should be up to the individual person to decide, if they want to go to church, if they want to, wear a mask or, feel the need for that. And certainly some people do, they feel they're more at risk of getting sick, and that's understandable. But like you said, it shouldn't be up to the government to decide when a place of worship is open or not. And it's sickening, really, to see.
The irony of it is, one of the accusations would be, you can't just say, church, you make your decisions, and that's separate, right? You're going to make decisions, and people will say, well, it'll affect the broader community, and if you're going to take it, you're going to spread it. And so the principle that people operate by is, you can't just say you're going to do what you're going to do, because it will have effect on everyone else. And I'll respond and I'll say, exactly, because you can't tell people stay at home and forget the fact that that's also going to have effects, right? Like if you force people to distance and stay at home and not go out and follow all the rules, that also has deadly effects. And so one way or another, everyone agrees that decisions you make are going to have tremendous effects on other people, deadly effects, like fatal effects. The difference is, we would say, one has everything to do with not just our freedoms, but our rights before God, and then decisions we make. And then the other one is bureaucrats and tyrants forcing things upon us, which also have very deadly consequences. And so obviously I'm going to lean more on the first side than the other one.
Well, yes, and I mean the consequences. It shows for itself that suicide rate is through the roof. Addictions, domestic violence. In the last year, everything that is wrong with our society that needs to be fixed has gotten worse, and everything that's good about our society has gotten worse. So I think, like you're saying, churches being allowed to function at their own way and how they see is fitting for what they're allowed to do under their own religions is a proper thing for the government to just respect, because it's not a uncommon known fact that even people that are in prison, they find time to connect with religion or culture in some way. So to take that away from people that are already struggling it has a drastic impact on people for sure. Now the churches in Ontario, we haven't seen them harassed at the same level as we've seen in other places such as Alberta and Quebec and British Columbia. But what is your interactions, if any, been with the health department, bylaw, the police during the government regulated pandemic?
None, really. We haven't had any interactions with bylaws. We haven't had any interactions with government officials, with the exception of Randy Hillier, who's been very supportive of what we've been doing, and I've appreciated the tremendous target he has put on his back, because as an elected official, his job is to make sure that our rights are secured, not to police us, right? An elected official is not supposed to make laws to control you. They're supposed to ensure that the laws that are in place are kept so you are protected and free. And so I'm thankful for him. In terms of police, no, we haven't had an interaction with police except for one retired police officer who came to our Good Friday service, who was very much in support of what we were doing and actually offered a number of really great resources so that we knew with certainty what our rights were and our responsibilities were. So of all of the interactions with those above mentioned groups, it's been limited and it's been all positive for the most part.
Well, that's good, because I know a lot of other churches have. We saw Pastor Archer Pawlowski have to scream them out of his church on the Passover, which is almost.
I was shaking, by the way.
Yeah.
When I was watching the video, not because of fear, but because of the boldness of him. I was kind of like, I was almost shaking, thinking this is surreal. Like this whole scene. It's like it's out of a movie. Like this isn't real, right? This is actually happening. It was very shocking for me to see that.
And I know some people have said, well, that's no way for a pastor to act. I'm not well versed in the Bible, but from going to church as a child, I do know enough that that this has happened in the Bible, right? That Jesus has done that at his temple. Had to remove people from the temple for the similar reason, that sanctity of that religious place, of that sacred place, of them defiling it like that. But yeah, that stuff like that is nice to see, because and I know people have mixed emotions about it, but myself, what I see is a pastor standing on the Word of God and saying that that this is what word I have to follow, not the rule of man, the rule of God.
Well, the way he was acting, I say, would be inappropriate if he was counseling a couple or if he was addressing an abuse victim. But someone who would say in that context, that's not how a pastor should act, hasn't really read or studied their Bible in any meaningful way, because the reality is elders and shepherds have been called and instituted by God to defend the sheep. And defending the sheep means you stand before wolves and you actually have to be ready to put your life down for the sheep. There's a portion in John's gospel when Jesus talks about how he's the good shepherd, right? He's the ultimate good shepherd for his people. But one of the principles we get from there is he says a good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. unlike the hired hand who flees when the wolf comes, or whenever there's danger, the hired hand runs away and wants nothing to do with it. But the good shepherd stands in the breach and will actually defend the sheep. And that's what he was doing in Calgary. He was doing just that. He was being a good shepherd for his people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, as far as the law, we know that Section 176 of the Criminal Code clearly states it's illegal for anyone to interrupt a religious service or gathering. As well, there's the rights and freedoms that were guaranteed to be protected under the Canadian religious practices under Section 2 of our Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So how do you feel about the events that have transpired in Montreal when the police were forcing worshippers out of synagogues? There's also the current situation at Grace Life Church in Calgary, where the RCMP have erected a temporary fence around the church, and they're preventing access to the church property with around 200 police officers.
So the issue with the synagogues, what you just said about our charter rights in the criminal code, you would think that there would be protections in place for places of worship. At least that was my understanding or assumption up until 6 months ago, that this is one of the reasons why churches, synagogues are tax exempt. They have certain protections because in a sense it's a sovereign land that the government doesn't have a claim on to tax and rule the same way they do other parts of the land. And so I thought that our criminal code was in place, and I thought our charter rights were there for a reason. And what I can say about that is I've been shocked and disappointed, to say the least, that the language that's been used is, your rights can be superseded or null and void if there's some sort of greater perceived threat as determined by a bunch of people behind desks who aren't actually on the ground. And so, it's disappointing that that's the case. I mean, with Grace Life in Edmonton, the situation is more than just that. The fact that Alberta Health Services, at the taxpayer's expense, can hire a private security company to guard the inner fence and then use the RCMP as bullies and thugs to guard the outer fence. And both of those fences were put up by a private company, and all they do is they put up fences for concerts and constructions. And so you have a lot of taxpayer money being used illegally to seize a church. I mean, if that's where we're at, then how far is that going to go? Like, how far is it going to go to spend millions of taxpayer dollars to seize a church? And it gets worse. They weren't presented with any documentation. They weren't given a warrant. I saw a video of people approaching the officers and simply saying, "What's your name and what's your badge number?" And the officers refused to answer, which I also thought was something that was required for police officers, is to identify themselves and to give your name and your badge number. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought a little more transparency than that. It's very disturbing.
Well, we're also seeing too, you see a lot of events, a lot of officers don't have name tags, or and this started with I think it was the G7 summit years ago. It was a common thing that was happening. But you are right, they do have to identify themselves, because a simple reason, anybody could put on a police uniform that they make themselves at home. I mean, if the situation is correct, you could even demand to see their photo ID, if it's safe to do so. I wouldn't expect them to produce that during a protest, but at the very least, their name and badge number. And the only reason I can see for them not providing that information, especially to media, would be that they know what they're doing is wrong. There's going to be repercussions down the road. What they may be and where they come from, I don't know, but
or they're ashamed of what they're doing.
Exactly.
And they don't want to do it, but they're in a bind because it's their job, it's their family, it's their kids, it's their pension, and they're secretly ashamed of what they're doing. And they'd rather, it's funny that now they actually not just get to, but now they have to hide behind masks as well. And so that mask can hide their shame, and they can hide their identity, and they can be disgusted with themselves because they're having to do this evil, illegal thing.
I mean, with the same church, before all this, we've seen Pastor Coates from the Grace Life Church was jailed for 35 days for refusing to not run religious services. I mean, and part of his bail condition was to not preach, basically,
or even step foot on the property.
yeah, which is uncomprehendable to think that you would expect a pastor to not do their job. So, I mean, how does this make you feel as a person who shares the same responsibility to preach the Word of God?
Yeah, uneasy, to put it mildly, a little uneasy that the reality of this exists, especially in a place like Alberta, which is supposed to be the Bible Belt of Canada. This is supposed to be the Texas of Canada, right? The conservative stronghold of Canada. And we're here in Ontario, which between us and BC are supposed to be the liberal strongholds, the very left-leaning provinces. And so if the most conservative province in the country is having some of these incredible demonstrations, and then here in Ontario, which is supposed to be even more red, I mean, what's coming for us? So a little bit uneasy, but having said that, I mean, one of the things that a number of us guys around the country, including James, the associate from his church, and some other guys from churches, in the prairies here in Ontario, we've connected. We talk regularly. We encourage one another, and one of the things we've realized is obedience to Christ is more important and is of greater value than whatever punishment we could face. And if the government will be so bold as to throw all of us into prison, then I don't think they understand what that means in a number of levels. First of all, I don't think they understand the outcry from our people and from even non-Christians who see this as being unthinkable and illegal and vile. But I also don't think they understand what it's actually going to mean to have all of these men who love and fear Christ together in prisons. And the reality, I saw the way that they responded to James. He's told stories about people coming to him every day looking for prayer, looking for guidance. Yeah, I saw that. The people were banging on the doors as he left in celebration of him. And so, James has said this is a foolish. He was interviewed a couple days ago. This is a foolish thing. They don't understand what they're doing. They think they're winning. They think that by putting us in prison and fines that this is going to be victory for them. And they don't understand that this will not be victory for them, either temporarily because of what will be accomplished, but ultimately, long term, they don't understand that throughout all of the history of the interaction of God and people, whenever you have a government or an authority stand against God's people and say, you can't worship, or you can't worship the way you want to, or we will punish you because you're obeying God, whether it's Pharaoh, whether it's Rome, and unfortunately, whether it's the United States and Canada, all of these empires will be crushed someday by God, who will not let his people be owned by them. So they think they're winning, but they're not. And so though I'm uneasy, I have hope that Christ will win. He will be victorious in all of this.
Well, in a part that I see as well is the government seems to miss the fact that a building isn't a church. The people are the church. So whether it's at a tent service in a field, or if it's at somebody's, like your apartment, right? You start with 4 people at your apartment. That's the church. And they seem to miss that fact that if people are going to worship, they're going to worship. And you can't prevent that. You can take away the building, you can take away the pastor, and they're still going to get together and they're still going to worship, because that's what it's about. It's not about a building or about a person at the front of the room talking. And I feel like they're so blind to what they're doing. They've got blinders on and they just see, we got to go this direction. But they're missing that element that the church is the people. And so
I don't know if you saw the video from this last Sunday at Grace Life's service. Their service is online, and they're obviously in a different place. And even James isn't dressed in his normal suit and tie. It's a little different. The background's different, but the entire church was informed in secret that they were going to meet at an undisclosed location, and so only the church knew about it. And so they were all there. The whole church was there at an undisclosed underground location. And so the stuff we saw transpiring around Grace Life Church, the fences being torn down, none of that was the church. They were not there.
No.
They were all worshiping and obeying Christ in secret underground, because, like you said, it's not gonna stop. You will not stop the people of God from worshiping. We have a higher authority to which we answer, and it's not Doug Ford, it's not our health officials here in Kingston, it's not the mayor, it's not the prime minister, it's Christ. He's our King, he's our Lord.
And yeah, and you're right. And that just goes to show what I said is people are they're gonna worship. And when I was able to get on the bail hearing for Pastor Coates and to listen in on it. The judge had said there was no he didn't put a ban on media. I just didn't want the video rebroadcasted, but you could report on it. And what his lawyer had said is true. It's not that he's not willing to comply with those bail conditions. He cannot violate his faith and his loyalty to God. It goes against his loyalty to God and his practices, so he won't be able to comply. And that's what the government really misses. Is it's not a matter of people saying, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm going to go to church. They're saying, no, I have to go to church for myself and for God. I have to go. So regardless of what you say, I need to do this part of my life. I'll wear a mask somewhere else. I'll do the little things, but this is one spot in my life that you have no say over. So
and what they think is that we're just another hobby or pastime. They think that we're no different than organized sports or going to watch a movie, which is foolish, first of all. But second of all, they forget that even though the vast majority of the population would be willing to say, yes, state, yes, government, we'll let you rule us. We'll let you tell us what to do. We'll let you tell us who we can and can't see, where we can and can't go. We'll let you give us a curfew. We'll let you give us an allowance if you take our job. We'll essentially let you be the king over our lives. We'll be your subjects and we'll obey you. And for the rest of the population, that's acceptable for them. But for people who confess that Christ is king, he is king, not the state, then we are required, it is our duty to submit ourselves to our king. And we must obey our king. And as his loyal and grateful subjects, we do what he says, and no one can usurp his throne. No one can assert themselves to his throne and say, no, we're king. And so that's what they don't get. They think that we're just rebels or fanatics or hyper fundamentalists, and they don't understand there is only one king, and it's Jesus, and it's not them. And so that's whose kingdom we belong to, and that's who we'll obey.
So just recently, the other day, I saw this video, and I shared it with you, which is kind of, it kind of brings into questions of possible double standards, or maybe just stuff's missed. But there's a video recently, hundreds of worshipers leaving a mosque in Calgary, and they kind of seem to be getting a free pass, if you will, in lack of better words, by the provincial and municipal governments. When not that far away at the Grace Life Church in Edmonton, there's fences up and they're under police guard. So how do you feel about this kind of a double standard in regards to how this government's handling religious services?
The first thing I think is that we clearly live in a culture where you have protected classes, protected people groups. You have groups that have victim status over and above other groups. And so, the first thing I'll say is, generally speaking, the white, heterosexual, cisgender, Christian male is at the very bottom of the intersectionality graph, right? That is the oppressor. In every way, that is the oppressor. And so that's Grace Life Church.
Yeah.
And so any other groups that have certain victim points where it's different, right? So they're not Christian, they're Muslim, they're atheist, they're Hindu. It's not male, it's female, it's not this, it's that. And so there are clearly certain groups, even in our legislation, even in Canada with hate speech laws, what you can and can't say about certain people, right? The idea of Islamophobia being something that can be punishable, but no such thing exists for Christianophobia, right? Who even assume that? The reason is because the white cisgender Christians are the oppressors, and so they have no claim to victimhood. So the first thing I'll say is all that is that playing out. It's clearly protected groups and groups with victim status who get certain protections that people like me don't, because I just happen to be a white, cisgender, heterosexual, male Christian. The second thing I'll say is I can't be surprised by double standards. The last year for us has been a buffet of double standards, right? It has been a master class on doublespeak from the government. And so I can't be shocked when the goalposts are constantly changing. And it's okay, for example, to sit on Megabus from here to Toronto, which is a 3-hour trip, where you and the bus, there's no 6-foot distancing. So you have all these people, right? You have 20 people, 30 people in a bus for 3 hours with masks on. That's fine. But during the strictest of all the lockdowns, you could have a church that could normally seat 400 people, but you only have 10 or 15%, which is still minimal. And so that's a very similar type of thing. People would argue, grocery stores are different. You're walking around, you're in and out. Okay, maybe, but clearly there are comparable settings where you have a high concentration of people together, where sometimes that's okay and sometimes that's not. Or why is it that if I go to a restaurant, I can sit down and I have to have my mask on until our server brings water, but the moment my water comes, even if I don't drink it, then I'm allowed to take my mask off. And so there's, I can't remember who said it, but I think Michael Knowles said that if the left didn't have double standards, it wouldn't have any standards at all.
Exactly.
And so I'm not surprised at double standards because the last year has been double standards on blast. And it's just all we've seen.
Well, I mean, and it definitely seems that today's day and age, it's definitely an age of cancel culture.
Yeah.
You get cartoon characters being canceled because somebody thinks it's. I made a joke the other day. I'm Aboriginal, or Native, right? And I said, and it just hit me when I was waiting across the street. The white guy pops up telling me it's okay across the street, and I said, how pathetic would it be if I started a petition to have all the crosswalks changed? Because it's the white man telling the native that it's okay to do something.
You might get away with it too.
But like, I'm not going to do that.
I know.
But, if you got enough people involved and said this is offensive to us, now they'd have to figure out how to change all the crosswalks all across the country.
Yeah.
And it's just a crazy way of thinking where certain cartoon characters are this and that, and I'm like, I never thought that as a kid. I just didn't think that way. And yeah, the definite double standards. And you mentioned the bus. I mean, I sent a picture to Mayor Patterson about the city buses. It was packed full of people, and I said, why is this acceptable, but I can't go to the gym anymore? And I wasn't expecting a response, but I mean, it's a legitimate question. Like, why can I do this, but I can't be 15 feet from somebody at the gym still? But it's and I think that's the frustrating part for everybody and it's always changing.
Yeah.
It's every day it's different. The example was like, we're not going to do a stay-at-home order because we know how much that impacted people's mental health and physical health, and so we're going to ease back some. And then less than a week later, stay home and batteries and candles aren't essential anymore.
Yeah.
And
you can buy a hamburger, but you can't buy the barbecue to cook it.
Yeah.
Or you can buy coffee, but you can't buy the coffee maker to make it. Or you can buy the flashlight, but you can't buy the you can't buy the batteries. So the other way around, you can buy the batteries, but not the flash. Just it's so arbitrary. And you're right that I think there's a growing frustration for people who are seeing this, and they're asking themselves, like, pick your lane, right? If this is the bubonic plague and it is going to ravage us, then just shut down everything. Just say everything's closed. The best example of that is just in this most recent stay-at-home order emergency, state of emergency theater, is non-essential travel is prohibited. Okay, fair enough. Non-essential businesses are allowed to be open as long as there's curbside pickup. Now, those two things put together don't make any sense, because what you've basically said is non-essential workers are still allowed to go to their non-essential workplace, even though non-essential travel is prohibited. They're allowed to sell non-essential goods by way of curbside pickup. And I, who I'm being told non-essential travel is prohibited, I'm allowed to make the non-essential trip to the non-essential workplace to get the non-essential item and then bring it back home, but non-essential stuff is prohibited. Or a big box store like Walmart, for example, is not allowed to sell clothes. But if I order clothes online from Sport Check, I can go pick it up via curbside pickup. Like that doesn't make sense. And I think people, after a year of this and the COVID fatigue, are starting to see it just doesn't make sense, right? Maybe it made a little more sense, but this, like I said about the double standards, there's been a masterclass on double speak. It's out of both sides of the mouth, different things that contradict, and more people are realizing, you're going to take Easter away from me again, and what's going to happen come next winter again. And so people are starting to see this does not jive. It just doesn't fit.
I mean, it doesn't help as well when you have government officials following their own idea of what following the rules is. And it seems to be that they fall under the rule for thee, but not for me. And do as I say, not as I do. When, even Doug Ford's saying, well, don't go near grandma and grandpa. But then he travels from Toronto to Mississauga to see Hazel McKellen.
Who's 100.
Who's 100 years old,
right?
And give her a big hug.
She's the greatest victim. And she's the most likely to die from this. What are you doing?
And, and try to backpedal a little bit and claim, well, I had business in Mississauga, and well, you just happened to be wearing a hockey jersey with her name on it, and had a birthday present in your car. And I think what they've done, what I've seen since this last, when they started with hitting the e-brake, as they put it, was a lot of people that were on the fence, trying to decide one way or the other, like, should I continue to, err on the side of caution and just keep listening to my government and my health officials and trust them? Or should I start thinking for myself and using my God-given common sense? What they done is they pushed a lot of people into that. I'm going to start thinking for myself and start asking questions. And I think it's only a matter of time. I know there's one side of the narrative from mainstream media, and I think it's only a matter of time before Justin Trudeau's money he gave them runs out. And they need to start actually sharing some of the other side, because enough people are asking questions now. And when people that subscribe to your online channels and your newspaper ask questions, you're not answering them. They're going to unsubscribe. And if you're not making money, Justin Trudeau's not going to give you any more money. So, but it's definitely complete double standard. Now, it seems like most churches across the country have seemed to have kind of bent the knee to the ridiculous government mandates. In a way, they kind of seem to be following more so the rule of man rather than the rule of God. So what are your plans moving forward to keep allowing, to allow the freedom of your religious services to continue here at Encounter Church?
We're going to continue to meet the way that we have been meeting. And the way that we've been meeting is the way that we believe that God has commanded that we meet. And that means that people who want to abuse or misinterpret portions of the scriptures like Romans 13 or 1 Peter 2 and kind of spread it like peanut butter over everything and say, well, Romans 13 means you have to obey the government. Well, no one believes that the government has the absolute authority to tell the church to do whatever they want. No one believes that. So we're all having to understand that. And so our conviction is we will continue to meet the way that we have, and we will sing and we will worship the Lord, and there will continue to be tears and people coming out and people who haven't been to church in a while or a year, and we will continue to obey Christ. If that means we outgrow our space, which it looks like we're on pace to do, then we have a few options in mind for stuff outdoors at various locations that we're looking into, but we're going to continue to do what we're doing. And I think that if the government's desire by actions they've taken with either Grace Life Church or other churches is going to scare or threaten us or other churches from backing off, they have failed in their mission. And so other churches who maybe were on the fence or who were, oh, we want to meet, but maybe we shouldn't, maybe that's going to scare them, and that's fine. But for those of us who have been obeying Christ and defying tyrants for a year, 6 months, 8 months, all it's done is it's emboldened us because we are even more sure of our convictions, and we are encouraging one another, and we're praying for one another. And so nothing will change for us. We will not change anything that we have done. We will continue to be faithful, and we're all ready for whatever that means, right? I think the last couple Sundays especially is in the midst of preaching and chatting with and discipling our people. I think we've all come under the conviction that we know what we're doing. We know what that means for us, potentially. And I think we lean into each other so that, like in the case of James Coates, if something should happen to our church or to me, you know, we're closed up, we're locked up, we're kicked out, I'm whatever, thrown in the can for however long that is, which I feel like is maybe a little bit further down the road for our particular context. Anyways, nevertheless, I know that our church is united in this, and we will support and care for one another. And so there is no fear. I think that's something we've all learned and we've come to grips with. We're not afraid, and they want us to be afraid. At every level, they want us to be afraid. They want us to be afraid of the virus because it's going to kill grandma. And if we're not afraid of the virus, then they want us to be afraid of what the government and the police are going to do if we don't listen to them. Or they want us to be afraid of the fact that if we don't get the vaccine, they're not going to let us fly or leave the country or travel, or they're going to create tiers of citizens. If I'm stuck in this city and I can't go anywhere else and I can't hop on a plane, they can't hold that over me. Fine, I'm stuck here. I'll be faithful, I'll minister. So we're not afraid, and that's what drives us. And the foundation of that fear, and I have to say this, is not some blind sense of that we are brainwashed because this cryptic book says don't be afraid. We are not afraid precisely for the reasons I've already said, that our king and our ruler is Christ. And so because he is our king, we know that as citizens of his kingdom, he will take care of us. And even if it means that costs us our lives, so be it, because we fight for a cause greater than our own. And in 150 years, everyone who's alive right now is going to be forgotten. And most of these churches may not even be open. But the name of Christ will still be proclaimed, and he will still be king over his church. And so we don't have fear because we know who we serve. And so we're going to continue to serve him. And in a kind of cautious, but a bold sense, not an arrogant, argumentative, ready to fight sense, but in a bold, assured sense, we say, okay, bring it on. Bring whatever you want to bring. You're not going to scare us, and we're not going to stop obeying Christ.
Exactly. I shared with Mr. Hillier when he was here, beginning of all this stuff happening last spring, when people were running around collecting toilet paper, and I'm thinking, what is wrong with people? Like, there's many other things at the grocery store I'm grabbing. That's the last thing on my list. And what came to me, and I don't know if I read it somewhere or whatever, but what came to me was when you mentioned fear. A society living in fear is a world doomed to be ruled by the greedy. So, I mean, when you say, like, when we're not afraid, it's not arrogance. It's confidence in the Word of God. So So is there anything, I mean, you already said kind of like, not cocky, not being cocky, but bring on your best because we're not scared. But is there anything that, you'd like to say to, government officials or police or other pastors or even just the public?
Yeah, so to government officials, the higher up level health officials and bureaucrats, they need to repent of this evil that they've done. That's what they need to do. I'm not going to tell them, hey, be better. Obviously, I would like them to smarten up and stop doing this nonsense. But what they need to repent of is the damage, and in some cases, irreparable damage that they've done in the lives of people. Because the teenagers in our city in particular, who I know firsthand through contact with other believers who've taken their own lives because of despair out of lockdowns, that's not coming back. That's not coming back. The marriages that have been destroyed, they're not going to get fixed again. The people who spent 20, 30 years working to save up enough money to start their own business or their own restaurant, who've lost that and seen their life savings and their livelihood and really decades of life washed away and they're not getting it back, that's not on the virus, that's on them. And so they have done a great evil to our city, our province, our country, and it's an evil that there's a lot of, like you said, greed. There's a lot of nefarious motives. It is, I cannot believe that it is simply good-willed. We desire to do what's best for you and protect you. I don't believe that for a second, because if that was the case, they wouldn't murder babies and they wouldn't kill old people. So I don't believe that for a second. So they have to repent. They have done a great evil, and they will be held accountable before God someday. Specifically in our context, I would say that our mayor should be ashamed of himself because he professes to be a follower of Christ. He's thrown his church under the bus. He's completely separated himself from his former church and trashed them publicly in city council and in the media. And as someone who professes allegiance to Christ and says that the Lord is his king, he should be ashamed of himself because he's not living it and he's not acting like it. And it is disgraceful to see someone with that kind of position, professing to love Christ, being totally okay with what the government is doing to Christ's bride, which is his church. So if I may be so bold as to say that to him, I will. To other pastors in the city, I would say they need to realize that the authority to decide what they do as a church is an authority that's been given to them by Christ and has been spelled out in his word. And so they also need to exercise a little bit of strength in the spine. And they need to be willing also to say, this is Christ's church, we will decide what we do, and that they also don't have to be afraid. If they really believe that Jesus is their king, and if they really believe that because of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, they don't have to fear death, because we know after death we go to be with our king, and they don't have to be enslaved to fear, because Christ has freed us from slavery to fear. If they're going to say they believe that, then they better start acting like it, because that's not what they're acting like. They're acting like they're afraid of death, or they're afraid of punishment, or they're afraid of suffering, or they're afraid of what their neighbors are going to say, or what the media is going to say, or what other Christians are going to say. And all they're doing is saying, we're afraid of everyone, except for the one for whom we should be afraid, which is Jesus Christ, who is our King. And so they need to smarten up as well, and they need to practice what they preach. And to the everyone else who's not in that, I would say, don't just stop getting all your information from Global News and CBC and CTV. First of all, they're all funded by the government, and so it's just, all they are is the propaganda arm of the government. I'm not saying stop watching them altogether, but I'm saying use your brain, do a little research, do some digging, not just in alternative media sources, but there are a number. And I would say get connected with the Liberty Coalition, go on their website, because you have a number of very credible, very, very intelligent doctors and virologists and epidemiologists and GPs and people who are offering, listen, but here are the numbers, here's the stats, here's what we know. Don't just be some hapless sheep, right? Do your diligence, use your brain, and find a good church and start going there. Find a church that's meeting and go there soon.
Well, just a final word or any scripture or anything that is, I guess I don't want to say pertains to everything going on. It's really hard to pin that down to one thing. But yeah, just a final word that message for just your thoughts.
Yeah, in Acts chapter 4, after a number of the apostles are threatened and arrested and beaten because they are obeying Christ and proclaiming the gospel, they are threatened by the religious leaders who functionally were like the government officials over them to say, stop doing it. Stop doing the thing that God has called you to do. And Christians are going to argue over, well, it doesn't say we have to meet in person. We can do Zoom church. They're wrong. They're wrong. There's no way that we can say that, oh yeah, celebrating the Lord's Supper or actually meeting and singing digitally is an adequate replace. Not church. It's not church. And so they were being required. These apostles were being required that they would disobey Christ and not do what he commanded them to do. And they said to the religious leaders, basically, you do what you think is best. But as for us, it is better that we obey God rather than man. That's what we're going to do. And then after they were beaten and then sent out by the religious leaders, they gathered together and they prayed for strength to endure. Mm-hmm. And then the scriptures say that they were amazed, that they were honored, that they were considered worthy enough to suffer for the sake of the name. And so that's been our position as a church summed up, that we will obey God rather than man, and we will obey Christ rather than some bureaucrat. And we are praying for strength and for the boldness to continue to do so. And if we should suffer in any way for the sake of Christ, we don't see that as a loss, and we don't see that as something for which we are to be pitied. We see that as a great honor, because our King, Christ, who lived on this earth, and he lived a perfect sinless life, and then he died for the sins of God's people. He did that willingly. He laid his life down, and he did so that we can follow him. And if we are so privileged as to suffer in the same way that he did, or for the sake of following him, that is a great honor. It is a great honor to suffer for the sake of Christ. At least that's what Christians have believed for 2,000 years. Outside of the last 100, we've lost that. But for a long time, the Reformers believed it was an honor to suffer for the sake of Christ. The Puritans believed it was an honor to suffer for the sake of Christ. And we believe that as well, that if that is what is in store for us, then we will celebrate that the Lord has counted us worthy enough to suffer for the sake of his name.
Yeah. So how can people contact you or see about services at the church?
So if you just go to encounterchurch.ca, everything is there. Everything about who we are and what we believe, and we even have a little bit of a, here's what we're doing, here's our response in light of COVID-19. Sermons are there, contact information is there. That's really the best way to connect with us and find out more about who we are and what's going on.
Now, for anybody that wants to join a service on Zoom, because you guys do Zoom your meetings, your services as well.
Yeah.
Where do they find that on Zoom?
So the best thing is we try to keep these Zoom meetings private, kind of passcode protected.
Okay.
And so if someone's interested, however, if they go to our website and go to our contact us page, they can just email me saying, hey, I'd like to join your church. Can you please send the Zoom link?
Okay.
And then we've had a few people do that in the last number of months, just kind of reach out of nowhere. So they can send me an email. All our contact information is on our website, and then they can ask for a Zoom link and we'll send it out.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think what you guys are doing isn't just a great thing, it's the right thing. And I know I don't speak for myself. I know a lot of people feel the same way. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and,
thank you, Ron.
Speak to people about what's the other side of things. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.